you, being sure they could not do you an injury. But no more of such fooling, and pray forgive my merry game at your expense. Henceforth we shall be friends, and you are heartily welcome to the best my kingdom affords." With this speech Terribus stepped down from his throne and approached Prince Marvel with outstretched hand. The prince was not at all deceived, but he was pleased to see how cunningly the king excused his attempts to kill him. So he laughed and touched the hand Terribus extended, for this fairy prince seemed to have no anger against any mortal who ventured to oppose him. The strangers were now conducted with every mark of respect to a beautiful suite of apartments in the castle, wherein were soft beds with velvet spreads, marble baths with perfumed waters, and a variety of silken and brocaded costumes from which they might select a change of raiment. No sooner had they bathed and adorned themselves fittingly than they were summoned to the king's banquet hall, being escorted thither by 12 young maidens bearing torches with lavender-colored flames. The night had fallen upon the mountains outside, but the great banquet hall was brilliant with the glow of 1,000 candles, and seated at the head of the long table was King Terribus. Yet here, as in the throne room, the ruler of Spor was dressed in simplest garments, and his seat was a rough block of stone. All about him were lords and ladies in gorgeous array. The walls were hung with rare embroideries. The table was weighted with gold platters and richly carved goblets filled with sweet nectars. But the king himself, with his horrid, ugly head, was like a great blot on a fair parchment, and even Prince Marvel could not repress a shudder as he gazed upon him. Terribus placed his guest upon his right hand and loaded him with honors. Nerle stood behind the prince's chair and served him faithfully as an esquire should. But the other servants treated Nerle with much deference, noting in him an air of breeding that marked him the unusual servant of an unusual master. Indeed, most curious were the looks cast on these marvelous men who had calmly walked into the castle of mighty Terribus and successfully defied his anger. For in spite of his youthful appearance and smiling face, every attendant at the banquet feared Prince Marvel even more than they feared their own fierce king. End chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Cunning of King Terribus. The days that followed were pleasant ones for Prince Marvel and Nerle, who were treated as honored guests by both the king and his courtiers. But the prince seemed to be the favorite, for at all games of skill and trials of arms he was invariably the victor, while in the evenings, when the grand ballroom was lighted up and the musicians played sweet music, none was so graceful in the dance as the fairy prince. Nerle soon tired of the games and dancing, for he had been accustomed to them at his father's castle, and moreover he was shy in the society of ladies. So before many weeks had passed he began to mope and show a discontented face. One day the prince noticed his esquire's dismal expression of countenance, and asked the cause of it. "Why," said Nerle, "here I have left my home to seek worries and troubles, and have found but the same humdrum life that existed at my father's castle. Here our days are made smooth and pleasant, and there is no excitement or grief whatever. You have become a carpet knight, Prince Marvel, and think more of bright eyes than of daring deeds. So if you will release me from your service, I will seek further adventures." "Nay," returned the prince, "we will go together, for I, too, am tired of this life of pleasure. So next morning Marvel sought the presence of King Terribus and said, "I have come to bid your majesty adieu, for my esquire and I are about to leave your dominions." At first the king laughed, and his long nose began to sway from side to side. Then, seeing the prince was in earnest, his majesty frowned and grew disturbed. Finally he said, "I must implore you to remain my guests a short time longer. No one has ever before visited me in my mountain home, and I do not wish to lose the pleasure of your society so soon." "Nevertheless, we must go," answered the prince, briefly. "Are you not contented?" asked Terribus. "Ask whatever you may desire, and it shall be granted you." "We desire adventures amid new scenes," said Marvel, "and these you cannot give us, except by permission to depart." Seeing his guest was obstinate, the king ceased further argument and said, "Very well, go if you wish, but I shall hope to see you return to us this evening." The prince paid no heed to this peculiar speech, but left the hall and hurried to the courtyard of the castle, where Nerle was holding the horses in readiness for their journey. Standing around were many rows and files of the Gray Men, and when they reached the marble roadway they found it lined with motionless forms of the huge giants. But no one interfered with them in any way, although both Prince Marvel and Nerle knew that every eye followed them as they rode forward. Curiously enough, they had both forgotten from what direction they had approached the castle, for whereas they had at the time noticed but one marble roadway leading to the entrance, they now saw that there were several of these, each one connecting with a path through the mountains. "It really doesn't matter which way we go, so long as we get away from the kingdom of Spore," said Prince Marvel. So he selected a path by chance, and soon they were riding through a mountain pass. The pleased, expectant look on Nerle's face had gradually turned to one of gloom. "I hoped we should have a fight to get away," he said, sadly. "And in that case I might have suffered considerable injury and pain. But no one has injured us in any way, and perhaps King Terribus is really glad to be rid of us." "With good reason, too, if such is the case," laughed Marvel. "For mark you, Nerle, the king has discovered we are more powerful than he is, and had he continued to oppose us, we might have destroyed his entire army." On they rode through the rough hill paths, winding this way and that, until they lost all sense of the direction in which they were going. "Never mind," said the prince. "So long as we get farther and farther away from the ugly Terribus, I shall be satisfied." "Perhaps we are getting into more serious danger than ever," answered Nerle, brightening. "One of the giants told me the other day that near the foot of these mountains is the kingdom of the High Ki of Twi." "Who is the High Ki of Twi?" asked Prince Marvel. "No one knows," answered Nerle. "And what is the kingdom of Twi like?" "No one knows that," answered Nerle. "Then," returned the prince with a smile, "if by chance we visit the place, we shall know more than anyone else." At noon they ate luncheon by the wayside, Nerle having filled his pouch by stealth at the breakfast table. There were great fragments of rock lying all about them, and the sun beat down so fiercely that the heat reflected from the rocks was hard to bear. So the travelers did not linger over their meal, but remounted and rode away as soon as possible. When the sun began to get lower in the sky, the rocks beside the path threw the riders into shadow, so that their journey became more pleasant. They rode along, paying little attention to the way, but talking and laughing merrily together until it began to grow dark. "Does this path never end?" asked Prince Marvel suddenly.